Hi, this is Ken McCarthy, and it's the System Club, and it's our coaching call for the month. And last month we had a really interesting call because it was a project that went on for several years, and we actually had several calls. That was with Cindy Kapler, and as some of you may know, Cindy is the head of a school in Arizona, and so her challenge is how do you get more students for the school, especially in a very competitive environment. So we had an initial session, oh my goodness, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and when we were, I think she was in London. Is that possible? No, it was in Chicago. And then we had another session, and I think another one, and then we had the fourth one last month. And it was so interesting to hear how her strategy has evolved, how she's invented and new marketing tools and discovered new marketing tools that we've never even talked about. But using the principles, she went out and developed this very unique marketing plan. I love stuff like that because sometimes you can make instant breakthroughs and instant progress, but generally it's a long haul to build something worthwhile. This call is going to be similar in the sense that it's a long project. This is not something that is a 1 week promotion. This is something that's been going on for 10 years, literally, and the other thing about it is it's not marketing in the sense that we normally think about. However, it is marketing, as I'm going to explain right now. Generally, we think of marketing as you position a product and you make it appear attractive and you get it in front of the right people and you price it correctly and you fulfill this on the delivery of the product and customer service and all that. But if you strip that down to its bare essentials, marketing is about perception. Hopefully there's reality behind perception. In fact, there should be reality behind the perception. But it's very much about creating and managing perceptions, that your product is good, that it's worthwhile, that it's worth trying, that it's worth the price. And so that's marketing. But you can broaden the scope of that to beyond buying and selling and look into other situations where perceptions need to be marketed. Now, the most challenging thing to do in the universe of marketing, if we call that marketing, and it is, sometimes it's called public relations, but believe me, it's all marketing. If we broaden that definition of marketing as wide as possible, the hardest marketing challenge you'll ever face is when you have to change a widely held perception. That's real hard. That's sort of like the train has left the station, and now you got to go and catch it and drag it back to the station and send it down another track. That is so hard as to almost be impossible. And the companies that do that for a living are some of the most highly compensated companies there are on earth. And they all tend to be in Washington, D.C. or New York. It's a very hard thing to do. Big corporations go to them when they have, quote, branding problems. And believe me, they pay a lot of money to solve those kinds of problems. It's especially hard to get the train back when all of the mass media, I'm not just talking about a few people, I'm talking about universal mass media, all of the public officials in the country are all saying one thing, and that's the thing that you want to counter. That's really hard. I mean, when the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and BBC and CNN and ABC, and you just list them, and they're all saying X, and you want the public to understand why, that is a task of truly epic proportion. And today we're very fortunate to have a System Club member who's been engaged in a battle like this now for 10 years. And I just want to set the stage, and then we're going to go into the details. As many of you know, 10 years ago, the city of New Orleans flooded catastrophically. The big problem from a public communications point of view was that a false narrative was immediately, literally while the flood waters were still rising, a false narrative was pumped out with great energy and great aggressiveness and great expense by the guilty party, saying, oh, this was an act of God, and oh, what a shame, and oh, New Orleans is doomed, and people shouldn't live there anyway, and hey, it's their own fault because they party too much. All kinds of craziness. But unfortunately, that became the belief among the whole world. Happened to be false. but as Mark Twain said, what did he say? That a lie can make its way around the world before the truth has had a chance to put on its shoes, and that's unfortunately the way the world works. So our guest today, Sandy Rosenthal, took on the humongous task of substituting a massive falsehood for truth. And I have to say, I've trained, I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of bright people over the years, and it's been fun. But if someone goes, who's your favorite student? I have to now say it's Sandy, because Sandy did it. Sandy did the impossible. Now the New York Times and all these newspapers and television people and journalist people are now saying what really happened, which is that there was an engineering failure. That city should never have flooded. There was no reason to flood. The storm was not as strong to create that kind of damage. It was entirely due to insufficient engineering. So welcome, Sandy Rosenthal of levees.org.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so Sandy, I'd love for System Club members to hear this whole story from the beginning. So you are a New Orleanian. Mm-hmm. That's where you've raised your family. Your husband's a native, and this flood comes, and now you're living. Where did you guys evacuate to?
We evacuated initially to Jackson, Mississippi, but when Hurricane Katrina went through that city the next day and knocked out all the power lines, we relocated yet again, this time where we stayed for 3 months, and that was the city of Lafayette, Louisiana, some 2.5 hours west of New Orleans.
Great. So like so many people, and I guess it's hundreds of thousands of people,
mm-hmm.
Suddenly you don't have your home anymore.
More like 1 million people.
A million. Oh my goodness. You don't have your home. You don't have your neighborhood. You don't have your local stores. You don't have your local school. You don't have your local doctor. I mean, listeners, please try to imagine that somebody just plucks you up and takes you 500 or 1,000 or 3,000 miles away and plops you down, and it's up to you to figure it out. And this is what happened to 1 million people. So you were one of them. And but after you made the adjustment, which had to be huge. However, I do know your husband is quite a clever and intelligent guy, and had actually foreseen this potential and had prepared his business to survive.
And he also asked his family, including myself, to pack for a month.
Wow.
He was, I think we're the only family that I've ever spoken to that knew we would not be back for at least a month.
Wow.
And that was exactly what happened.
That could be a whole show unto itself, because that is a rare foresight. No one wants to think of the worst case, but you know what? It's probably a good idea to be aware of the worst case and to have a plan. What if the worst case comes? But we'll just put
really
that
quick. I know this is going to be a short hour, but the main reason that we packed for a month wasn't so much for the water. We knew that there would be enormous wind damage that would knock down all the trees and would knock down all the power. So you can't come back to a hot city without electricity. Now, no one knew the flooding was going to happen, but at least I had all my stuff, which allowed me to get to work and create levees.org, which I'm sure we'll get to shortly.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we might as well get to it. So there you are in Lafayette. This thing has happened. The world is one part of the world is telling the rest of the world that, oh, what a tragic natural disaster and couldn't be helped, and what a shame. What gave you the clue to say, wait a minute, we need to take a better look at this?
I think it all gets back to my education. I went to an all-women's school and Mount Holyoke College, and we were taught to be inquisitive and to never accept anything unless it was backed up by hard data. And it didn't take me long to see that nothing made sense. I mean, the Katrina missed New Orleans. By reading government GAO testimony, that's Government Accountability Organization testimony and studies, it became clear to me right away that the organization that built these levees that failed is federal. Meanwhile, a fairy tale had been put into the ears of all the media early on, and that was a fairy tale, just as you already outlined to your listeners, a monster storm, a city below the sea, but this is the key thing: local corruption. The Army Corps of Engineers in these early early reports stated that local officials and environmentalists as well had thwarted their original plans to protect the city and ending up in the system that broke apart and failed during Hurricane Katrina. So that's the proverbial, when you throw someone under the bus, that means you're diverting attention away from yourself and onto others. And I figured that out in approximately October of 2005. That was about 6 weeks after the flood.
Wow. And they packaged that story, very well.
Very, very well. Like all disinformation campaigns, it was simple and it was plausible. The actual truth about the flooding of the city is complicated. There were 50 different breaches. That's complicated. But this story with a bare kernel of truth in it was oh so plausible. It was oh so believable. How could anyone imagine that the Army Corps of Engineers was responsible for this flooding? This is the organization that had built tens of thousands of miles of levees along the Mississippi, Missouri, and Ohio rivers. They were the gold standard. So
and let's fast forward to a conclusion,
sure.
and then we'll double back.
Sure.
Just in case anybody hasn't gotten the news, there is no longer any doubt in any serious person's mind, and that includes the best forensic civil engineers in the world, that the flooding of New Orleans was due to engineering failure. It was not due to the storm. So we're not talking about a theory or Sandy's personal belief. This is something that is now established fact. Now, 10 years ago, or 9 years, well, I can't do the math, but 10 years ago, Sandy got a glimmer that this was a strong possibility and wanted to know more. And so that was about 6 weeks, you say, after the flood itself.
Yes.
And then what did you do then?
Well, I could not have done this without my 15-year-old son, Stanford. Stanford was very proficient in use of the Internet, and he could create websites very, very well for someone so young. And together, he and I decided to develop our own information campaign to counteract that train that had left the station. Now, I thought that was an excellent, I've known you 10 years and I've never heard you use that term, but that's excellent. To catch the train that's already left the station, but that's what we set out to do. And I was the spokesperson, and Stanford was the media guy, and I could not have done it without him.
Now, Levees.org has gone through many evolutionary developments. Where were you when you started? What was your original concept? Great name, by the way. Fantastic domain name, which is important, everybody. I mean, if you have a smart domain name, that solves a lot of communications problems. So great domain name, and you had Stanford there to help execute your ideas. What was your original key idea?
The key idea was if we were going to change the narrative and write history the way it's supposed to be, we felt we needed a mission. And so we created a mission, which is education about why New Orleans flooded. That was our mission. And then we put that up on a website, the mission. And then we figured, well, we need a little bit more than just a mission and a website. We need members. So I thought, how am I going to get members? And I know, I came up with the idea of putting a petition on our website. It was an interactive website, and I asked people to sign this petition asking President Bush to keep his promise that he made 1 week after Hurricane Katrina when he stood in Jackson Square and promised to bring the city back better and stronger. So we put the petition up on the website. We put the website up on the net, and we emailed all our friends and asked them to go to the website and sign the petition. And overnight we got 200 signatures, and we called them members. So now here we are. We have a website, we have a mission, and we have members. We must be somebody. And that's how it started.
Excellent. Wow. And a couple of quick principles there. One is, if anybody's out there and ever encounters something similar where they want to do something like this, time is definitely of the essence. And so getting that up and running, quickly, as Sandy did, was very important, because unfortunately the way the world works is, had that been delayed a few months, it might have been a much lower response. Now, this was such a huge story, and so many people were so profoundly affected that the impact probably would have persisted much longer. But as a general rule, you really need to strike while the iron's hot if you're going to have any chance of building a critical mass. So Sandy did that, and then she did classic marketing, which is make a concrete offer that involves a specific action on the part of the people you're making the quote offer to. That offer was sign a petition, and it's concrete, not, hey, let's all throw our arms in the air, but here is a petition, please sign it, please tell your friends. Very concrete action. So great, so you had 200 members pretty quickly.
Yeah, overnight.
Overnight. So you knew, and this is a really important point too, it's people wonder how things get done in the world. Well, they get done in the world by doing something. And one of the ways to get something done is to have allies and colleagues and members, and that's got a practical side of just people who can help in one way or another. But it is, as Sandy mentioned, it's a demonstration that you're for real. Who's levees.org? Well, at that point, Sandy could say it's a membership organization with 200 members. Well, that's a significant number already. Mm-hmm. Great. So I didn't realize that's how it. We've never talked about the actual beginnings.
That was before you joined us. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I couldn't have given you better advice. I mean, you did the absolute perfect thing. So you had 200 members, and they were all starting to focus on an issue. Now, I know at some point there were some, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but at some point I saw the signs before I met you. There were the levee signs. You had some meetings. Hopefully I'm not jumping too far ahead, but what was your next step?
Those were early on. In the very, very beginning, we realized that we needed to have some sort of event to bring people together. So we had some yard signs made that said, "Rally on the levee." And we planned a first event that was actually on the Mississippi River levee, literally right next door to the Army Corps of Engineers headquarters. And this was January 21st, 2006. So this is still pretty early on. And there were really very few people in the city even at that time.
Oh, yeah.
But we had the event. It drew 300 people, which was a ton.
Wow.
Today it would be 1,000 people easily. But 300 people, it got a lot of press. I was still viewed as a strange woman with an interesting opinion at that time. It took a long time before Levee.org had the credibility that it does today. However, we were recognized and put on the map, so to speak, by that event.
Well, let's talk about that. First of all, just for people listening, New Orleans, January 2006 was a very desolate, underpopulated place, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Many people had not come home yet. Their houses were, I don't know when the flooding finally was thoroughly drained away, but there were more than a few houses that were underwater for many weeks. So some houses you couldn't even enter if you wanted to. And then thousands and thousands of houses were so severely damaged you couldn't live in them. Most stores were closed. I'm not sure if the schools were up and running yet. So when we say January 2006, we're basically talking about coming back to a war zone. So just to set the stage for people. But the other thing, again, that Sandy, you just did this perfectly, Sandy. As soon as Sandy had a quorum of people, she leveraged that into a live event. And I can't tell you how powerful, from a marketing point of view, it is to have live events. They're a lot of work. They're not easy. A lot of coordination. A lot can go wrong. It could have rained that day. But it creates, I don't know, for lack of a better word, it's almost like a kind of magic when suddenly you've got all the people that share an interest all together under one roof, or in this case, under one sky. And it's so interesting because there was probably a paucity of things for the media to write about. Anybody that could organize themselves and have a clear message and bring out people was going to get attention. So again, a perfect move. So January, you had your first big public meeting. When did you come up with the logo? I'm just curious because I love the logo and I love that sign.
My very creative son came up with that logo way back in November of 2005, long before the event. Yeah, he's very creative. He's an unusual mix of engineer with design. His title is actually design engineer. He works for LinkedIn now.
Oh, he does?
Yep.
Oh, cool. He's living in San Francisco, right?
That's right. That's right.
Wow, wow. And he was just 15 at the time. Wow, that logo is as good
15
as
years old. Mm-hmm.
that logo is as good as you could get if you went to a New York logo company and tried to get the best logo you could. So great. So, and by the way, logos aren't necessarily the end all and be all. However, they are. It's good to have a good one, and it's good to repeat it over and over again. It just sort of creates a mnemonic for folks. And so the fact that levees.org had a great one right out of the gate is an amazing advantage in dealing with the larger public. So we're in January. You have your first meeting. Now, the other thing you mentioned is that at the time, some people, especially people that had a vested interest, were looking at you as sort of this, well, who's this crazy lady, and what does she know, and all that.
Right. I didn't have any experience like this beforehand, and keep in mind that story that was being told about the local corruption and the monster storm, it was just so believable. The truth was complicated, but the falsehood was simple and plausible. So that's what I was facing, and it would take years, really, until I got anywhere near the credibility that I have today.
You had to replace a simple falsehood that had the advantage of coming out first and hard with a complicated truth that was being fought every step of the way.
And difficult to believe, yes.
Right, and I forgot that part, which is very important.
Yeah, it's very important.
I think this is my second quotation of Mark Twain on this call. He said, "It's easier to fool people than to convince them they've been fooled."
Yes, indeed. Oh, my goodness.
And this is what you had to face. Too bad Mark
Twain
wasn't
around. People don't like to find out they've been fooled. It makes people very uncomfortable, and we'll get to more to that later, because years later people would realize they were fooled. But that's years later, and we'll stick with 2005, 2006, where we are right now.
Great. So just a real quick recap: Sandy came out of the gate quick, with a name, with a logo, with an opt-in strategy, with a mission, with a rallying philosophy, and with a live meeting. And we're going to go forward, but I just want everybody to remember too, it was not like the world was anxiously awaiting this message. In fact, the weight of the whole media, local and national, was against this viewpoint. It
was uncomfortable.
So this was not an easy.
If you live in California, it's uncomfortable to think that our government might have been responsible. It strikes a chord that is inherently just unpleasant and really repulsive, and that was what I was dealing with at the time. So it was. Believe me, I look back, and at times I wondered what pushed me to do it. But the answer to that's easy. All I had to do was look out my window and see the damage from the flooding, and see the heartbreak, and see find out that my niece's doctor had committed suicide. The number of suicides was incredible later. Even if you didn't lose your, if you didn't drown, you might have, the depression might have gotten you later. So anyway, my point is, as chaotic as it may have appeared at the time, I was easily reminded of why it was important. There were so many affected lives.
And people are entitled to the truth. I mean, we can't turn the clock back and undo the damage. But shouldn't people at least understand why it happened? And then there's the issue of, what about the future? Will New Orleans reconstruct itself correctly? Will other places? Because as you pointed out very early in this call, there are levees everywhere. Not just, there's a lot of them on the Mississippi, but there are Army Corps of Engineer levees in, I guess, every state of the Union or close to it.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, 55% of the American population lives in counties protected by levees. So the majority of the American people could have suffered something just like this. Maybe not exactly like this, but could have suffered flooding due to levee failure.
I'm sorry. So go ahead, please.
Well, after the levees failed here, the Army Corps of Engineers rewrote the standards for levee building throughout the country. So we were the poster child, but everyone in the country is now safer because of what happened here. The Army Corps no longer builds the sorts of levees that they built here.
Wow. So it's not only important just as a matter of justice. If somebody's been injured, they should know why. And the second thing is it was a matter of preserving and protecting New Orleans for the future, because if the errors perpetuated, then the next time there was a similar storm or a worse one, there'd be another flood, and then it also had to benefit for the entire nation. So this was not just a pet project on Sandy's part. This thing had many ramifications for literally hundreds of millions of people. So if you're wondering, well, why did Sandy do this, and why would anyone do something like this? Well, if you care, you'll do something like this, and Sandy clearly cared. Great. So now we're only up to January, which is very early in the game. You've got
9 years to go.
Yeah, I know. Then what happened? It
was a process. It was very slow, and there was no day that all of a sudden Levees.org was credible. It was a process. I mean, when we opened up chapters in other states, that gave us a lot of credibility. When we opened up a chapter in New York and in Florida, and then we opened up more later, that really helped give us credibility because it made us appear that we were, as you said earlier, this isn't just a local issue, it's a national issue and a very important issue. And another thing that brought us a lot of credibility is when we were sued, as in lawsuit, by the American Society of Civil Engineers in our attempt to pull back the curtain and expose the hanky-panky of the Army Corps of Engineers. And that took place in December of 2007 when, using children, high school children, we created a spoof of the Army Corps of Engineers' attempts to control the external peer review of their study. I don't want to get too complicated here because we could be all day, but basically the American Society of Civil Engineers filed lawsuit against me for putting this little video up on our website, and we actually and that gave us a lot of press. Being sued by the little fledgling group, being sued by the American Society of Civil Engineers. That's an elite civil engineering organization that the Army Corps of Engineers was trying to loop in and bring down with the Army Corps with their controlling of the narrative. But anyway, I just want to keep things simple for this short time we have. And
Sure.
we stood up to the American Society of Civil Engineers. We said, sue us. And in front of, with media cameras all around me, with the click of a mouse, I put the video back on the web. With cameras watching it. It was a very fun event, and then of course the Army Corps of course the society did not sue us and sort of ran away, licking their wounds, mumbling something about, well, we just want to build strong.
Wow,
and,
I'm so glad that you told that story because I had forgotten that. Mm-hmm. That was quite amazing. It was a very funny video. I wish. I don't know, Sandy, if you happen to have a link to it and you remember, send it to me, and I'd like to post it.
Of course I will. And the beauty of that, and that's what Ken, that's what you showed me well, is when you get these opportunities, you harness them and take advantage of them. And most people would think being sued is an awful thing. I looked at it as a golden opportunity to get media coverage. And I think of all the things we've done, few have worked better in the past 10 years.
Wow. Well, but it's an easy thing to say, but it takes guts. A lot of people might have been so intimidated by that threat.
Yes.
They might have shut them down, and that's what they were hoping. But instead, they stepped in it, and you threw it right back at them.
Well, it turns up in America there are laws that created to protect people, just like Levees.org, from being intimidated by organizations with large, fat wallets. And luckily, I had a lawyer friend who did pro bono work for us, and he was the one that told us about that and stepped up to the plate to defend us, and it had a happy ending.
That's great. That's great. So, needless to say, Levees.org used video, and they, when Sandy says 2007, if people remember, that was pretty early in the internet video game. There was a fair amount of people using video at the time, but it's not like, today, a video, everyone's got videos. Well, in 2007 they didn't. So you chose to make an investment, because that was a really good little film. I remember it. It couldn't have been quick or easy or inexpensive, and it was a very good film, and obviously it got a result, which was to irritate these irritable people.
Who had never been crossed before in their existence, probably.
This is true. I mean, how many people challenge engineers, and that raises this issue of you got to have guts because when all the people with the degrees are saying, "Oh, get lost, you don't know what you're talking about," you really have to have thought through the issues very carefully and have some steel in your spine to keep at it. And by the way, we're talking about levees.org, but this applies to anything. If you want to start a business or grow a business or anything you want to do, you're going to have this because there will be invariably dragons that will step in your pathway. It always happens. And the question is, what are you going to do? Are you going to fold and run, or are you going to stand your ground and find out that the dragon's just a little, salamander or a gecko?
Well put.
Yeah. So that helped. That gave you a lot of press. I think it created a David and Goliath scenario where people said, "Look at these bullies picking on Sandy." They may not have known you at the time, or they may have only been vaguely aware of what levees.org. What is it? I don't really know. But when people see just an abject injustice, that tends to get a lot of people paying attention and involved. So. That you consider that was a big boost for the organization.
It was. The timing was good. It was early on in our existence. And the video was actually all high school children, so it was very cute. I mean, there's no the high school kids are cute. There's no doubt about it. During this little video, all dressed up in Corps uniforms, and we got it. We crammed the whole thing into 1 minute, which is another important thing. Keep it short. Keep it short. Because the American people are not stupid; they're just busy, really busy. And if you have that attitude, you can reach them.
And it was funny. It was entertaining, and it was clear. There was no confusion about what the message was.
Right.
Now, how did you get from 200 members to where'd you get over 20,000? I'm trying to remember where.
Over 25,000.
25,000.
Yeah.
So that's quite a jump. That's a jump of over 100-fold.
Yes. If I were to pick the most important contributor to growing our numbers is our embracing legislation to reform the Army Corps of Engineers. The American people are very quick to give you their contact information, name, address, and information if they understand they are contacting their congressperson, their member of Congress, in support of good legislation. So that was probably our biggest grower of our database, and then to do that we had to have a what do you call it? It's a platform company that meshes their website with yours, and seamlessly any member of Levy.org will go to our website, and if I were to say, for example, click your mouse and send off this letter to this member of Congress to reform the Corps, they will do it. You had to have a crystal clear message for our members. And as I said a moment ago, people are very willing to give you all their information if they understand it's going to their member of Congress.
And, of course, you had a very motivated constituency because a lot of them were New Orleanians that went through this and wanted to get to the bottom of it.
Right. And of course they would in turn send it to their family and friends, and et cetera. And I think that was probably the major grower of our database between 2005 and 2010.
And believe it or not, people may think, well, maybe TV watchers in Omaha were confused by what happened, but surely the people of New Orleans knew the real story. And the answer is they didn't. They were, they had their own traumas to deal with, so they were absorbing the news accounts just like everybody else. So
most stakeholders were not as fortunate as I was. I lived on a small sliver by the river that didn't flood, and that gave me the luxury of time. But the overwhelming majority of people, even if you didn't flood, you probably lost your business or your child's school, or you lost somehow. And people were focused on the simple things, like where am I going to live? How am I going to make a living? And where are my kids going to go to school? So that was at a time where we were focused literally on survival.
They didn't have time to engage in a multi-hour-a-day research program to find out what happened.
No, indeed. Yeah. Unfortunately for the Army Corps of Engineers, they weren't counting on me.
I know.
And not to say that I did it alone, but I'm talking from the very beginning. from
Well,
the
I mean,
very beginning.
the reality is certainly you had definitely some good help here and there, but the
Mm.
reality is, and everybody should get this, is nothing on this planet happens unless there's one, pardon the word, crazy person who is not going to give up, okay?
Yep, that's
So
true.
it's
It's
just,
crazy.
the idea that a committee is going to do it or a team is going to do it or it doesn't work that way. You need the person that's never going to stop.
The
And
driver.
yeah, the Army Corps of Engineers didn't know. I mean, just so everybody understands this, the Army Corps of Engineers is so big that if you see a big enough pie chart of the federal government's budget, they are actually a visible slice. Okay? They are so difficult to deal with that even President Eisenhower back in the 1950s was complaining about them. Okay, so this was not a minor adversary. This was hardcore. This is about as hardcore competition as you're going to ever find yourself.
With the taxpayers, with the taxpayers as their pocketbook.
Oh yeah, they get. Yeah, how
Because
you like that? They get to buy their their
Right.
ammunition for free from the pockets of taxpayers. Yeah.
Later on, there were lawsuits filed against the Army Corps of Engineers for the failure of the levees and the loss of all the property, and the Army Corps of Engineers used taxpayer money to defend itself against those lawsuits.
Yep. Yep. And let's be clear about this. We have laws in this country, and most of them are pretty sane. And there's a legal concept of negligent homicide. That means if you were supposed to fix the brakes on somebody's car, and instead you went out and got drunk, and you put 3 bolts back on instead of 20, and the car crashes, and someone dies. You know what? You're in a lot of legal trouble.
Yes.
And this is to me the textbook definition of negligent homicide. You were hired, empowered to create a levee system. You didn't do your homework. The levees failed. Hundreds and hundreds of people were killed. This was a serious thing. This is not, we'll cut them some slack. No, not at all. This is something that needed to be rooted out. This is something that needed to be exposed. This is something that people needed to understand, and it's very important for reasons that we already gave. So you got this. You had this growth machine based on the gathering of petitions or having people sign petitions and
Sending off letters to members of Congress.
Yep.
And each
there was
person
a lot
that
of that.
did one of these campaigns, we kept them on a database. And we told them, look, if you don't want to receive email communications from us, just let us know, and you can unsubscribe. And still we were able to build our database to, at one point it was over 25,000.
Yeah, and your membership was very activist oriented. I'm a member, and I get the emails, and frequently getting a message, hey, this is going on. Someone said, we'll get to this. Let's talk about this too. Somebody said something. We need to counter it. But we would get messages like, the New York Times just said, oh, Katrina, the worst thing that ever happened. Too bad. And levees.org would send a message saying, hey, we just had a major publication say absolute nonsense. Would you please respond? So Sandy was not only building the membership, but she was turning them into a force. And that force would descend on various politicians or
usually
news
media,
outlets.
usually reporters with the media.
Yeah. Let's talk about your media campaign, because that was very, very important, and you handled that, again, about as well as things can be handled.
Well, thank you. We very early on in our development, so still in the year 2006, we created a team of people, and we called them the Counteraction Team. And their goal was to react to and correct wrong information in the media or misleading information in the media about the New Orleans flood and or the people of New Orleans. You have to realize at that time, people of New Orleans were regarded as stupid for living there and imbeciles for rebuilding. So
Right.
this team of people that at one point in our 10-year lifetime was over 100 people, and it was nationwide. And these people would spring to action every time we let them know about such and such a media story was wrong. And we wouldn't tell them what to say. We would tell them they have to write their letter. And the beauty of that is it prevented these news sources from recognizing what's called as a campaign. If you had 100, look, for example, if you had 10 people send the identical letter, that would be ignored by the news source. The news source would smell what they call a campaign. But if you have 10 different people send completely different letters, all on the same issue, that gets the proper attention it deserves, and they often get not only printed, but often the editors of these papers will write back and say, thank you for letting us know about this. So that's when you know you've got a good campaign going.
Yeah, this is, if you're ever in a situation like this is an invaluable tool, and make sure you listen to this call again and hear the details of how Sandy did this, because media can have their minds changed. They're not unreasonable.
Can I get a bad static on my end?
How are you?
Yeah, yes, it's still getting a static.
Okay.
Yeah, it's quite terrible. I can't understand you anymore.
Okay. You have that number that you hang up and dial in again.
Okay, I'll call the number, dial the number again.
Great.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Well, Sandy's doing that. I cannot possibly overstate how huge a challenge this was. These things aren't supposed to happen. In other words, an individual is not supposed to be able to turn around a story of this scope, and an individual is not supposed to prevail against a massive federal government agency. And some of you may know that James Carville character, who's down there in Louisiana. He met Sandy a couple of years ago, and he could not believe that one person and one pretty much homegrown organization, I mean, now we can admit it is homegrown, but it always appeared to be very large. He just couldn't believe that so much was done with so little resources. I mean, this would have been a $30, $40, $50 million PR campaign, and probably more. And it might not have even succeeded as well as this one did. So this was one for the books. So I don't know.
Sandy has joined us again.
Great. Okay. Welcome back, Sandy.
Thank you.
How's it sounding now?
Perfect.
Great.
It was probably the Army Corps of Engineers recording our conversation.
They're a recording machine caused some static.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, guys, we'll show you how to do things right.
Yeah, that's right.
So we've got the strategy of building the membership. We've got the strategy of engaging the membership. We've got the strategy of very meticulously targeting journalists one by one. Every time somebody made a sloppy or inaccurate or incorrect statement, they would be receive emails politely saying, hey, you know what, there's actually more to it, and here's what it is.
Exactly.
And again, this is a big undertaking. Like, you'd have to write a 7 or 8-figure check to get this done in the real world if you went to a PR firm that specializes in this. This was a lot of work.
I've never really thought about that. I'm sure you're right.
Trust me, Sandy. Nobody gets the. Well, you remember I was telling the listeners while you were redialing. You met James Carville, and he couldn't believe that so much was done
without paid staff.
Without a big somebody writing big check, big staff, and telephones.
He was so surprised by it. He said it twice, and he repeated it again when I left. And he said that alone is a story.
Yeah,
is what he said.
Yeah, believe me, Carville knows. He knows if there's one thing he knows the business of shaping public opinion, and he knows how difficult it is. So one of the things that you did that I liked, I maybe even suggested that you did it, was to give because this was a hard situation. Mm-hmm. It was hard because of what people went through, and it was hard because of the size of the opponents. It was hard because the story had already been calcified.
The train had already left. I really like that picture that you put in my mind.
Yeah, and there was a way to win this thing, but the only way to win it was to last. a long time and to keep at it. There was no possibility of a shortcut. And one thing that happens when you're doing something like this and you're working with a large group of members is morale. People could very easily say, you know what, Sandy, we love you, but let's just move on because we're never going to win. We're never going to get the truth out. The ability to keep morale going.
The way we did that was we celebrated successes every moment we could. Be it a great editorial that actually talked about the failure of the levees, be it the fact that one of the local news sources had sent out a memo to all their reporters saying, from now on, if you ever talk about the flooding in New Orleans, you call it the federal flood.
Nice.
That's a success. And what we would do is we celebrate those successes. And one of the hardest things I did, and you helped me with this, Ken, is when Levy.org received an honor or some sort of recognition for our work, or if I as leader received a recognition or honor, I had to bite the bullet and let everybody know and just do it with humility and show people that that is a reflection of their raising their voices and is recognition of them and their hard work. And you showed me how to do that.
Right, because it's normal people, and Sandy, even though she's done an extraordinary thing, is a normal person. Normal people don't want to, be
blow their own horn.
Yeah, they don't want to do it, and it makes sense. So how do you receive awards, without sounding like you're blowing your own horn? So it's a very simple thing. Just say we did it. This is proof that all our efforts are we're winning. It was a phrase that you used a lot. We're winning. We're winning. Even though, it was, you were saying you're winning, but it was already, the scoreboard was already 1,000-2 with the core ahead, and you scored one more point, so it's now 1,000-3, and you're going, we're winning.
Yeah.
But that's morale building, and
yeah.
Leadership. Maybe 95% of morale building is keeping the morale high of leadership, is keeping morale high when everything is looking.
Every opportunity, never let an opportunity slip by, to celebrate successes, and also never let an opportunity slip by to embarrass the Army Corps of Engineers for their dumb things that they tried to do. In the early, the first 6, 7, 8 years, the Army Corps of Engineers treated me and Levy.org with very disparaging terminology.
Yeah.
And that came back and bit them. For example, using back-end software available to any amateur blogger, I was able to catch the Corps with their hand in the cookie jar, so to speak, or really with their pants down. It turns up that Army Corps personnel were sitting at Corps computers, logging onto my blog and saying really vicious things about me and Levy.org supporters.
Yep.
So talk about embarrassing.
Yep, and New Orleanians in general, they were saying.
And New Orleanians in general, to supporters, New Orleanians, and so I called the local TV station, the biggest one, and told them I had proof that the Army Corps of Engineers was, trying to rewrite history using comment sections of my blog, and they were also doing this at the local newspaper, the Times-Picayune online newspaper. They did it there too, and I had proof. With these, they're called IP addresses. I'm sure your listeners are familiar with computer IP addresses, which is basically the same as a telephone number. Yep. So I had proof of this behavior, and we brought it to the TV station that did a big story on it, and then, of course, we uploaded it to YouTube. And initially, the Army Corps of Engineers did not take responsibility. They basically said, well, what do you expect us to do, like watch every employee we have? We have 1,600 employees, which is not a very good response. So 4 days and 25,000 YouTube views later, which at that time was a lot. This was, the year was December 2008.
Yeah.
So that was 25,000 views in 4 days was a lot at that time. And so 25,000 views later, the colonel of the Army Corps of Engineers issued me a formal apology.
You love that.
You've got to realize the PR, the media, and there's almost no one in town that doesn't remember that, that incident where the Army Corps was caught with their pants down.
Mm.
So that's another thing we did. When we highlighted and drew attention to the Army Corps' arrogance, I guess for lack of a better word.
And again, it's that David and Goliath scenario. It's, here's little David getting kicked by this Goliath, and most people are going to be outraged by this, especially if you were ultimately the victim. Your house is flooded, and the next thing you know, the Army Corps of Engineers is kicking. The group is trying to bring truth out, and behaving in a very unethical way. They didn't help themselves. Now, you also this could be. I realize as we're getting into this, this could be a 20-hour call. So let me talk about one of the other things that you did that I just love. You instituted a program of installing plaques around the city. And everybody's seen historical plaques. But whoever thought that a historical plaque could be used to get the truth out against the odds? So could you talk a little bit about your historical plaque program and the fight you had to go through to get those plaques posted and how you actually? Yeah.
Every one was a fight. Every single one. There are powerful people in this city, and they're called the Army Corps of Engineers, that don't want these plaques put in the ground. And behind the scenes, they would be pushing levers and pushing buttons and pulling levers to throw hurdles in front of my group in our efforts to put these plaques in the ground. And each one is a different story and a different set of challenges and a different set of hurdles. But we persevered, and we drew upon the power of the neighborhood residents. In all three cases, one was in a lily white neighborhood, one was in an absolute black neighborhood, and one was a mixed neighborhood. But in all three cases, my little group leveraged the power of the residents, of the neighborhood residents, because they wanted the plaque in their neighborhood. And in all three cases, it has a happy ending. Not an easy route to get there, but in all three cases we had happy endings, and in all three cases the plaque went in the ground on the day that we planned that it would. So one was installed at the anniversary of Katrina, or as I say, the anniversary of the flood in 2010, a second one in 2011, and the third one was just a month ago in 2015.
And these plaques tell the unvarnished truth, which, believe me, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is not happy about. And these plaques are sitting forever. I mean, for all practical purposes.
They should last more than 100 years.
Yeah. And this is, you may think, oh, this is a small thing. Well, if the mission is to get the truth out, well, now there's a brass or a bronze or whatever it is plaque sitting in a prominent place that if anyone goes and reads it, it's absolutely clear why the flood happened.
And the important thing is they're vetted and fact-checked by the Louisiana Office of Historic Preservation. So it's not some plaque that we had made ourselves.
Right, and that's another so interesting about this. You were so good at ally building, and so you worked with the Louisiana Office of Historical Preservation.
Yes.
And of course they had a vested interest. Now the one thing we haven't mentioned is it's not just the Army Corps of Engineers. It's all the private contractors whose bread is buttered by them. It's all the media people whose bread is buttered by them. All the publications. I mean, they had a lot of local influence. So,
yes.
Sandy, you kind of had
money
to zig
talks,
and
yes.
Exactly, and you had to zig and zag and find the people for whom money did not talk,
right.
Who were more interested in the truth than anything else.
Right.
Now, you also built a memorial center. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and that's another example of the power of the residents. And if they want something, in America, if the residents are against something, they can stop it. And so it's really important. I'm sure anyone that's trying to build a restaurant or build anything knows you've got to get the neighbors to be supportive of what you're doing. So in 1 year ago, almost exactly, I got a phone call from a neighborhood resident in the mixed neighborhood of Gentilly. And she called to tell me that the city was buying up blighted lots and renting them or leasing them for just $250 a year, and it turns out that there was one at the site of a catastrophic levee breach, which is in the middle of the city. And I had no idea about this, but it was the neighbor that brought it to my attention. Well, so 2 days later, I filled out the application and turned it in, hand turned it in hand-delivered it to the city because I had a vision of building what's called an outdoor, we call it an outdoor exhibit hall that would explain the breaches, not just the London Avenue breach, which is where that lot was, but all the breaches throughout the city. So something like for example, an outdoor museum, if you will, explaining the breaches. So that was the vision. And 1 year later, on July 11th of 2015, we had a ribbon cutting for this outdoor museum, and it's now there for all to see. It's open 7 days a week.
Mm. And you also have an annual bicycle run that's a memorial where you take people from breach to breach.
Yes, we take them to 3 different breaches, and it's quite beautiful. We ride along Lake Pontchartrain and then through City Park. It's quite a lovely and also a healthy way to get a little dose of history.
Mm. Now, Sandy, we're running up against the hour. Do you have a few more minutes, or do you have to run?
I do. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Thanks so much. All right. So there was something else that you did that was brilliant, which is you interacted with the top forensic civil engineers in the country. Mm-hmm. And tell me what you did, why it was important that you did, and how that turned out to be one of the big turning points late in the game, because this was a 10-year battle, and it will never. Yeah. I don't know when it will be over, but certainly massively huge things have been accomplished. But this last piece was really important. Could you talk a little about that and how you did it?
Certainly. In my process of doing the research for those plaques I spoke about a few minutes ago, I read a report that was put out in 2008. It's 333 pages long, but I figured it would be worth understanding and knowing. Well, it turns out deep in that 333-page report was key data that had been left out of the executive summary. Now, when reports come out, everyone reads the executive summary. No one's going to read the whole paper. Well, this key data was data that blew apart that fairy tale that I spoke about earlier today, the fairy tale that local politics and local corruption is the reason that we had this failed levee system. This key data blew the fairy tale apart. I found it by accident. And then I realized that the people who wrote this key data, they probably didn't really understand that New Orleans got thrown under the bus because of this. So what we did is my colleague and I flew up to Missouri and I met with a gentleman, a civil engineering expert by the name of J. David Rogers, and we helped him understand that this key data was left out of the executive summary and that no one knows about it. And we encouraged him to write a new paper that would put all the right information out there, and because the people of New Orleans deserved it. People of New Orleans, even as late as 2013, still believe that we were responsible for the flooding, that our elected officials helped cause it. So the good professor wrote a paper that was published just last month. And this paper not only contains all the right information about why New Orleans flooded, be it which is the Army Corps of Engineers, they even went so far as to retract the wrong conclusions they drew way back in 2006, which is something we couldn't have seen coming. But it just goes to show you if you push something long enough, good things will happen. If you just don't give up, good things will happen. So this paper is extremely important. It was just published last month in the journal Water Policy, and it's a one-stop shop. It contains all the most important issues about why New Orleans flooded, and the final conclusion is it was federal through and through. There was no local involvement. It was all a fairy tale that was told, as I said, right in the beginning from that little disinformation campaign.
And these guys are the ultimate authorities and experts on the technical issues involved. So, these are the ones whose opinion mattered.
Right. John Barry, author of Rising Tide, everyone knows him, told me that there's nobody more credible than this expert, J. David Rogers. There's nobody. He was the one.
Wow. And he came forward.
And he came forward.
And was willing to tell the truth. And then finally, the gray lady, a.k.a. the New York Times, a.k.a. the hardest paper to get to tell the truth,
right.
They finally gave in and started to just tell the real story. It took them that long, though, right?
It took them a long time. And the way we pulled that off is we offered them an exclusive. on this, because we knew this article was going to be coming out, and we offered them an exclusive to the story where we could give them a link to the article before it went public in this past month, and they accepted the exclusive.
And by the way, that opinion that I just expressed to the New York Times is mine and mine alone. I know that Sandy has a high regard for them, but so don't blame her for what I just said.
Well, on the other hand, Ken, you did say that they're the paper of record, and if something is true, if it's in the New York Times, it must be true. You also said that.
Exactly. Exactly. And so that kind of brings us to where we are today. So the top technical authority has come out on the side of truth. The New York Times has come out finally on the side of truth. All the other newspapers are falling in line. It's now pretty difficult for anybody to stand up there and credibly blame the weather or blame God or blame New Orleans or blame Mardi Gras or whatever they were blaming. They can't do that anymore. It's over. That game is over. However, and this is just the way the world works, and we should bring this part up. The Army Corps of Engineers now claiming, oh yeah, we admitted it in 2006. We took responsibility, which is just beyond preposterous.
It is, and it just so happens that the Corps' quote-unquote apology in 2006 is completely scrubbed from the internet. You cannot find a video. You cannot find a transcript. It's even very difficult to find a newspaper story on their quote-unquote apology that they supposedly gave in 2006, which isn't true at all. What they gave was an excuse-laden non-apology.
Yeah.
Where basically in the same breath they go, well, at the end of the day, we're responsible, but you know, those environmentalists and the local levee people, they forced us to build this. But at the end of the day, that is what I call an excuse-laden non-apology.
Exactly. So they're continuing, but they are now they're defeated. If the battle was to get the truth out and to get the truth understood and to get the truth into the public record, that war has been won.
Yes, it is absolutely won. Now we just have a little mopping up to do.
I was about to use that phrase. Now it's just a minor mopping up operation. And again, I want to let everybody just please understand that that this was such an impossible situation.
I'd like to share something with your listeners that you told me on the moments that I felt overwhelmed. You told me, Sandy, imagine this big cornfield. He said, you have this huge cornfield. He says, all you have to do, Sandy, is just rise up just a little bit higher than the rest of the cornfield. That's all you have to do. And I have to tell you, that gave me a lot of energy and a lot of courage to understand that I didn't have to be a mile above the cornfield. I just had to be a little bit higher. And so thank you, Ken, for that.
Well, like I said at the beginning of the call, you're absolutely my favorite person to work with because you always did what I suggested. Like, you didn't just agree with me. So many people agree and go, oh, that's brilliant, brilliant, and then they don't do anything. And I'm like, well, what good is that? I don't want to be brilliant. I want you to win, And I can't think of anybody that more consistently and thoroughly executed on things. It's something for everybody to study. And really, anyone who thinks they have a hard marketing problem, you don't know what hard is. This was the ultimate hard marketing problem, and it was won. It took 10 years. Took an incalculable amount of time and energy. But, the three questions in life are what's the prize, what's it going to cost, and is it worth it? And the prize was in the face of one of the biggest cataclysms the United States have ever faced, to get the truth out so that people that suffered know what really happened. It's a matter of justice, and also to hopefully prevent this kind of thing from happening again in the future. That's a pretty darn big prize. And the cost was huge for Sandy. I mean, this was 10 years of her life doing this pretty exclusive to every other thing. So now
that's
only
correct.
Sandy
My husband calls my household the Levy Channel, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Oh, what a patient man.
He has been patient.
But so, from as a bystander, I can say definitely it was worth it because we got this great benefit from it. I hope, Sandy, I hope you feel it was worth it. I think it was, for the good that you created. This just And there's the other thing that people have to understand is without Sandy Rosenthal, this would not have happened, period, end of story, never would have happened. We'd all be talking about the vagaries of the weather and oh, what a shame, and those
and
poor
local corruption. And that
those poor corrupt people
sinful
now.
city. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And instead, educated, informed people are now saying, wow, we better keep an eye on that Army Corps of Engineers because they're not always doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that could save thousands of lives, billions and billions of dollars in the future. So as a guy that didn't have to do the hard work that Sandy did, is totally worth it. And Sandy, I think you know the way most of us waste 10 years of our lives, I think you did quite you developed something very valuable in those 10 years.
Well, thank you, Ken. It was the only thing I can add is personally, I've gained so many friends with this work. This work is, I mean, my number of friends is probably increased by tenfold. Because of the work, and that's something that's made me a richer person. And then also, your listeners, you've talked about how much you like to work with me, but much of your listeners need to know that much of our successes we could not have done without your help and assistance. And I want to make sure that your listeners know that as well.
Well, it's the biggest fun that I've had in a long time. I seem like a very mild-mannered person, but I actually love kicking ass. However, I need to kick the ass of someone very large for it to be a fair fight. And so getting to fight the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers through you a little bit, was just the greatest fun.
Vicarious enjoyment.
Exactly. So I hope everybody listens to this call at least one more time because everything that Sandy confronted, you will confront in anything that you try to do, whether it's a business or a nonprofit or a worthwhile cause. And, at the end of the day, the difference is how much do you want it? How big a price are you willing to pay? And also how smart are you willing to be? Sandy was the ultimate student. I mean, because you didn't really have a PR background or
No.
It wasn't like you already knew this stuff. It was learn on the job, so to speak.
Yes.
And I've never seen anybody pick stuff up so fast and run with it brilliantly. So this was just big fun. Makes me glad I learned marketing and have taught people because this was the best use of my time, I think, ever.
Well, I agree with that.
So
I agree with the good Levies.org, all the Levies.org supporters, thank you as well.
Great. So Levies.org, you can still go to the website. It's still active. You can become a member. You can track the mopping up action, which is as fun as anything. When you go to New Orleans, you can visit the plaques. You can visit the memorial. You can go on the bicycle ride. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff you can do and to participate in this. It's something that we can all, as Americans, take great pride in. So Sandy Rosenthal of Levies.org, thank you for this time and thank you for your service to the nation.
Oh, my. Well, you've made my day. Thank you, Ken.
Okay, talk to you later.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.